political issues. Before I turn things over to Dr. Adeola Agoke to introduce this week's guest, I did want to just make a couple of quick announcements, and I will pop these in the chat as well. First of all, we are online for Africa at Noon this week and next week, March 29th. So please don't come to Ingram Hall. And then following March 29th, we will be back in person on April 5th in Ingram Hall. Our great hope is to offer live streaming services in the future so that we're able to accommodate both our virtual and our in-person guests. And we thank you so much for your patience as we work with the university to make those services available. I'm going to pop in the chat a couple of announcements for funding opportunities for graduate students. Please feel free to share these widely with your networks. And so without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Adeola Agoke of the Department of African Cultural Studies to introduce this week's guest. Adeola?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us at today's Africa at Noon. And before I start with the introduction, I would want to call on my colleague, Dr. Samuel England, who is the chair of the Lectures and Committee in the Department of African Cultural Studies. Sam, please, over to you before I do the introduction, please.
Oh, you want? Okay, I'm gonna go first.
Yes.
Well, in that case, I have the pleasure of introducing two of our wonderful speakers, one from on campus and one from off. And then, of course, our guest is Kemi Balogun, and we'll hear from my colleague Adeola in just a moment specifically about it. I'm here, I guess, to tell you a little bit about the role that the Department of African Cultural Studies is playing in this talk and in a total of 7 talks on the theme of embodied Africa. I don't want to steal your thunder, Adeola, as far as the specific remarks that you'd like to make about our distinguished speaker, but I can tell you that we're basically right smack dab in the middle of the series on embodied Africa. Some of these talks are on Zoom format, as this one is. Some of them are in person. Some of them, of course, are in conjunction with Africa at Noon, our venerable series on African topics, courtesy of our friends in the African Studies program. I can make a very, very brief individual comment. I promise I'll make it brief, but I'll say that on this topic on which Professor Balogun is an expert, an internationally known expert, having to do with spectacle and pageantry. This is something that I've taken an interest in other contexts, having to do with Arabic, and in sort of learning and trying to edify myself a little bit on it in past years. I drew upon some of our local scholars. I'm thinking of George Mossy, our historian of many decades ago, on pageants, and had a theory of pageants and mass media. As erudite as that theory is, it's basically completely unembodied. So what I see this talk doing is, among other things, is filling in gaps. Of course, there's the geography of West Africa that we'll be learning about here, as far as pageants and public displays and beauty all go, but also just the kind of sociological and social sciences turn toward the body of recent decades. So I think actually this talk really stands to fill in a number of gaps for us, and I'm thinking in terms of discipline and very sort of applied kind of study of pageants and beauty in such, aside from the kind of disembodied sort of theory from which we've drawn in the humanities. So Adeola, can I hand it back to you then?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will quickly say that at some point after the Professor Kemi's Balogun presentation, Sam and myself are going to be coordinating the Q&A section. So I am going to start by quickly introducing our guest speaker for today. Professor Kemi, short form Kemi, Balogun studies gender, globalization, nation, migration, and embodiment in Nigeria. She received a PhD in sociology with a designated emphasis in women, gender, and Sexuality from the University of California, Berkeley. Currently, she's an associate professor in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and Sociology at the University of Oregon. Dr. Kemi Balogun has published articles in outlets such as Ethnicities, Gender and Society, and African Studies Review. She is the author of the Beauty Diplomacy, Embodying an Emerging Nation, Stanford University Press 2020. Beauty Diplomacy is the winner of the Women's Caucus of the African Studies Association's Heido Snyder Prize 2021. Dr. Kemi Balogun is currently working on a book project that examines mobility, travel, and citizenship in Nigeria and the Nigerian diaspora. A presentation today entitled Beauty Diplomacy, Embodying an Emerging Nation discusses beauty pageants in Nigeria as big businesses that are transformed by multiple stakeholders into contested vehicles for promoting complex ideas about gender and power, ethnicity and belonging, and a rapidly changing articulation of Nigerian nationhood. Please join me this afternoon to welcome Professor Kemi Balogun. Professor Kemi, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Agoke, for that really kind introduction. And thank you everyone for that really welcoming to be a part of this, this lecture series. I want to thank Dr. Magwe for the invitation to speak today. I also want to thank all those that have been involved in putting together this Africa at Noon lecture series, Dr. McCord, Dr. England. Thanks for your work in putting this series together. I also want to give many thanks to Unifier Dyer, who has been really helpful logistically and technically to help with this virtual talk. So really excited to be with you all today. So you can go to the next slide. So one of the most frequent questions I receive about my book is how I got into studying beauty pageants. I initially got interested in the topic during trips to Nigeria starting in the mid-2000s, where I noticed that the pageant scene was booming and embedded in the social landscape of urban life in Nigeria. It was not uncommon for me to encounter a beauty pageant broadcast on TV, see news articles featuring the latest beauty queen, or a poster advertising an audition for a beauty contest plastered on a wall at a shopping mall. At one point, my younger sister was even recruited to participate in a beauty pageant during her visit to Nigeria. So I was struck by the ubiquity of pageants in Nigeria and their increased popularity. A few years ago, Basket Mouth, a well-known Nigerian comedian, said in jest that you'll soon hear of contests like Miss Pretty Feet or Miss Long Neck to poke fun at the sheer number of pageants popping up in the country. So while this comment from Basket Mouth was meant to be a joke, it was, to be fair, not too far off from the variety of pageants that you'll see in Nigeria. During my research, insiders estimated that there were well over 3,000 pageants held in the country. You can go to the next slide, please. Beauty contests are attached to a host of activities, products, and industries, from expected sites like promoting cosmetics, such as this one for Miss Delta Soap. The next slide, please. To endorsing businesses like tourism. So this is an example of Miss Tourism Nigeria. Next slide. They're also used to promote other businesses like telecommunications. This is Miss Telcom 2009. Next slide. Beauty contests are also call attention to social issues, such as the need to promote peace. So this is an example of Miss ECOWAS Peace Pageant, whose winner is expected to work towards building goodwill between the 15 economic community of West African states, otherwise known as ECOWAS. So I became interested in particular in how pageants were important to representations of the nation. Next slide, please. So this is an example of Miss Golden Jubilee to celebrate Nigeria's 50 years of independence. And it was also linked to Nigeria's Good People, Great Nation national rebranding campaign in 2010. Throughout all of these different pageants, a common narrative is positioning beauty contestants as role models who can address important social problems, serve as role models for youth, engage in dedicated charity work, and address the most marginalized elements of Nigerian society. They also are positioned as working as liaisons that bridge community and inspire optimism. Next slide, please. An off-cited example that was often referred to me in my fieldwork as being the pinnacle of pageantry in Nigeria is when Agbani Darego won the Miss World pageant in 2001. This was the first time that a Black African had won the Miss World pageant in the then 50 years run of the competition, the international competition. And her win inaugurated multiple state functions, carnivals, and parades that were held in her honor. Next slide, please. Politicians and state officials made comments such as, quote, "This young and gifted lady symbolizes the new Nigeria and a democratic dividend. Her victory has now opened doors to our youths to compete with the best in the world." They also championed a drastic shift from Nigeria being mired in, quote, "the dark days of military rule and the #1 haven for corruption and bad governance," to the #1 in beauty and intellect. Another politician shared, quote, "Darego has become the greatest ambassador of Nigeria and the continent. Darego will have access to areas that even diplomats will not be able to reach." In these statements, state officials linked a single crowning moment to Nigeria's national trajectory. This was also a particular moment where Nigeria had made a recent transition to democracy just 3 years prior in 1999. And so there was also a link to kind of the optimism of leaving behind military rule that was also projected onto this particular win. In these statements, politicians and state elites mused that Darego would have access to the types of advocacy and work and make a difference in international affairs that even diplomats would not be able to reach. Next slide, please. In the book, I argue that Nigerian beauty pageants are an important site for understanding the intersections of gendered embodiment, national identities, and global belonging in the country. I position Nigeria as an emerging nation and recognize the optimism surrounding Nigeria's economic future as a growing economic powerhouse. When I started the research, Nigeria was the second largest economy in the continent. It's now recognized as the largest economy in the continent. But when starting the fieldwork, I was capturing a particular moment of heightened anxiety, but also hopefulness about Nigeria's future potential. Experts have often described Nigeria as a country that's pivotal in shaping and will become even more pivotal in shaping emerging markets due to a growing middle class, its large population, especially its teeming young population, and for its economic potential. At the same time, it's an incredibly diverse yet divided country due to ethnicity, religion, and geopolitics. In the global imaginary, Nigeria is often depicted as a country filled with communal conflict, social chaos, and rampant corruption. I use the term emerging nation to understand Nigeria's place in the global political economy and the relationship to contentious cultural politics. Two larger national narratives shape the dimensions of emerging nationhood that Nigeria engages with. On the one hand, the Africa Rising narrative emphasizes the continent's rapid growth and situates Nigeria as pivotal to this growth. On the other hand, the African crisis narrative stresses continued social problems, class cleavages, persistent ethno-religious struggles, political fraud, and broader social divisions. Affiliates of the Nigerian beauty pageant industry, one that's highly attuned to image management, are uniquely positioned to turn this narrative around in terms of wanting to do the work to repair Nigeria's poor global reputation. Those that were affiliated with the Nigerian pageant industry view themselves as best equipped for promoting the positive attributes of the country, in which upwardly mobile, ambitious, charming young women were positioned and seen as the public face of a country on the rise. I use the beauty diplomacy narrative as a concept to understand the redemptive work that beauty pageants do. In this talk, I will demonstrate the effort that goes into building contestants up as beauty diplomats, and also some of the underlying constraints that accompany this work. Next slide, please. I situate my book in the Women as Nation literature, which theorizes how women's bodies come to symbolically represent the nation. The work of scholars such as Nira Yuval Davis, Carolina Ferreira, Anne McClintock, and Jacqueline Mogwai show how idealized femininities rely on tropes of motherhood, work, domesticity, sacrifice, and cultural preservation to construct and reproduce national representations and aspirations. This billboard shown here, blazoned with the mantra, "No woman, no nation," is one of a common political rallying cry that illustrates this women as nation thesis. The position and status of women are viewed as an important engine that's important and foundational to a nation's development. I want to say that I also found this particular billboard to be ironic, because you'll see here, the person who is at the forefront is the then governor of Kwara State, where I took this picture, and the women are in the background. I found that there were similar logics happening in the beauty pageant industry, where the men were at the levers of the industry in terms of ownership and using these pageants to strike business deals and make political connections, but it was often relying on the symbolic work of women and their bodies to be able to facilitate these connections and to do, again, this reparative work that I'll talk more about today. Next slide, please. Beauty pageants are a cultural civic institution that connects the industry to political and economic elites from above and ordinary people from below. From above, pageants make connections to those at the helm of state management and the movement of economic capital. And from below, they're expected to connect with everyday ordinary people and Nigerians, and to include elements of Nigeria that are recognizable to, again, the everyday person in Nigeria. So I'll spend a little bit of time kind of illustrating what I mean by situating pageants as a civic cultural institution, and talk about how they're able to make these connections to elites who, again, occupy and manage nationalism from above, and then also talk about the ways in which they connect to ordinary people from below and how they integrate forms of everyday nationalism. Next slide, please. So one of the ways in which elites are connected to these pageants is oftentimes you'll see in pageant programs, state officials will include either a welcome message or ads advertising their state, depending on where the pageant is held. So here you have an example from one of the pageants, from one of the pages from the pageant programs, in which the Delta State governor is advertising tourism in his state. He described Delta State as the Switzerland of Nigeria, ostensibly to tout the state's oil wealth, since much of the country's oil deposits are found in that area, and also to stress peace. Delta State has been the site of ethnic clashes due to jockeying over material resources, and the governor in this particular ad championed his three-point agenda of peace, security, and development, and saw this as an opportunity to reach out to pageant fans and position beauty pageants as a partner in that process. It's also very common for pageants to include the photos of the political leaders from where they're hosting the state. So you also have a photo here of the then governor of Lagos State, where they were hosting the pageant that year. Next slide, please. Beauty pageant owners also did work to reach out to elites, to strike business relationships, and to cement their own positions as part of Nigeria's upper class. The Nigerian beauty pageant industry is dominated by men in terms of who owns these pageants, but they often rely on beauty contestants, who are all women, who are viewed as approachable, attractive, and hospitable to connect with other business executives, political leaders, and celebrities. So it was very common for these business owners to bring contestants to meet and greets, social events, and courtesy visits. And this was seen as a way of easily striking up rapport with new politicians or potential business executives who, you know, had potentials to have new business dealings. And it was a way of facilitating these connections, again, because the contestants were seen as approachable, eager to learn, and this was, again, a way of facilitating these connections. Next slide, please. Beauty pageants also work to resonate with an audience of ordinary Nigerians who expect authentic, quote unquote, representations of their nation. Using outfits such as these, which directly signals Nigeria's cultural heritage, served as a means of incorporating recognizable signs of ethnic and national identity into the pageants. In one of the pageants I studied, contestants also had to cook a regional dish with a focus on flavor, presentation, and etiquette. And in doing so, beauty contests worked to tap into popular cultural practices that signaled the accomplishment of nationalism through recognizable, routine, everyday actions that connect people to a broader imagined community, to borrow Benedict Anderson's terminology. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I think the next slide. Okay. Contestants work to mediate the relationship between elites and everyday people. For example, in their charity work, by making public appearances, founding nonprofits, they champion for the needs of the downtrodden. So, and they would often talk about their work in lobbying politicians or others in elite positions to bring attention to important social issues, and especially social issues that were connected to the most vulnerable segments of Nigerian society. So again, these are ways in which they were highlighting how they were connecting to everyday Nigerians, and especially Nigerians that were the most vulnerable in terms of their age or because of their economic background, and how that was an important work in terms of how they highlighted the work that they were doing. Previous slide, please. In this book, I studied, in my book, I studied 4 different pageants, and I'm happy to talk more about, you know, the similarities and the differences and kind of understandings of them in the Q&A, but I'll just kind of briefly list them. And again, I'm happy to talk more about them in depth. So I studied Miss Nigeria, the most beautiful girl in Nigeria, Queen Nigeria, and I also studied the hosting of the attempted hosting of the International Beauty Pageant in 2002, the Miss World pageant, which was ultimately moved to London due to a series of protests. My research is based on 14 months of fieldwork in Nigeria. The bulk of my research occurred in 2009 to 2010, but I also had follow-up visits to Nigeria in 2013, 2016, and 2018. I worked as an intern and unpaid intern and chaperone for 2 contemporary national pageants. I also, through that internship, I was able to observe the audition process, the rehearsals, the training and rehearsal period, the preliminary competitions, and the show. And I was also able to accompany the winner on press interviews, photo shoots, public appearances, and courtesy visits. Most of my research was based in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial hub, but I also traveled to other cities throughout Nigeria for state-level competitions and auditions. I completed a total of 65 formal in-depth interviews with a mix of organizers and owners, producers, corporate sponsors, contestants, and judges. On average, the interviews lasted about an hour. The majority of my interviews were with contestants who were between the ages of 18 to 26. All of them were high school graduates, which is a minimum requirement to be able to participate in pageants in Nigeria, well, for the adult pageants. And many of them were current college students, recent college grads, or were awaiting college admission. Owners and pageant executives for the pageants I studied were middle-aged men who ran media and marketing companies who were between the ages of 45 to 60. I also collected archival material and analyzed hundreds of print and visual materials such as brochures, websites, organizational documents, video recordings, and newspaper clippings. Next slide. I think 2 more slides. Yes, thank you. Fans, promoters, and boosters upheld beauty queens as role models to be emulated and respected. And they were seen as representing their communities and the nation through promoting particular ideals about womanhood and also particular ideals about the nation. Beauty queens were queenly aware of their positions as beauty diplomats, stressing their own positive attributes as being beautiful, intelligent, and charming young women. These positive attributes and traits were reflective as being a positive reflection on the country. Contestants were very aware of the country's poor image, and they sought to remedy it. For instance, Faith, a contestant, noted, quote, "Pageantry is another means of promoting the good side and the good nature of Nigeria." In other words, it means getting the attention of other countries down here to Nigeria, showing them how peaceful, hospitable we are here in Nigeria, create a relationship with other countries. Pageantry is one of the ways that can be achieved. Faith saw herself and other contestants as cultural ambassadors who could use their beauty, charm, and hospitality to gain attention for Nigeria and maintain ties to other countries around the world. They also saw themselves as serving as liaisons to the state and others with influence. And they also perceived pageants as a vehicle to counteracting these negative perceptions of Nigeria. Again, one that viewed Nigeria as mired in social chaos, political corruption, and social divisions. Next slide, please. Similarly, Penelope, a beauty contestant, noted how pageants could address foreigners' negative perceptions of Nigeria, especially in recognizing the position of women in Nigeria. So she shared, quote, "Number one, we're telling people that here in Africa, women are also given a sense of responsibility. And pageantry has been able to say that. There's a whole lot of misconception about women in Africa, women in Nigeria, that they're treated badly in terms of widowhood, education, and all of that. So pageantry has been able to break that barrier. Pageantry has done really well. It has been able to not just help Nigeria, but her citizens. Penelope encapsulates how beauty diplomacy was leveraged as a concept to show that beauty queens were not just doing superficial work, but were engaged in helping citizenship and changing perceptions about Africa, and Nigeria in particular. Next slide, please. To fit into these expectations of serving as beauty diplomats, beauty queens worked to develop aesthetic capital, which was a total package of traits and skills that went far beyond physical beauty. They had to show that they were warm, that they were responsible, and ambitious young women who were ready to make a difference in their communities. Contestants worked to build up their aesthetic capital, which was often described as, again, this total package. They had to hone their external physical beauty and also develop an internal disposition that showed that they were kind, civic-minded, and warm, and wanted to engage with the public. They often pointed to their charity work in helping the most vulnerable segments of the Nigerian populace, orphans, the elderly, and those battling chronic diseases like sickle cell anemia, as evidence that their public engagement and work mattered. They leveraged their work as beauty diplomats and the beauty diplomacy narrative to build this aesthetic capital. Aesthetic capital provided contestants with some measure of legitimacy in which they wanted to pursue their own motivations in a way that allowed them to circumvent ideas of them as being greedy or purely self-interested. Beauty contestants cultivated themselves through a concept I call aesthetic reflexive selves. So they had to show that they were virtuous, that they were responsible, upwardly mobile, and formidable young women. So this was a particularly kind of delicate navigation that they had to do, because they had to show that they were doing this out of interest of, promoting these positive attributes for Nigeria as a country, and that they were dedicated to doing charity work and dedicated to helping others. And they had to do this in a way that folks saw them as, again, being sacrificial, making these sacrifices to help others. But oftentimes contestants would tell me that they were participating in these pageants because they wanted to secure their own upward mobility. But they couldn't really say that, as being there. They had to couch that within not being perceived as being too greedy or self-interested by, again, doing this work that promoted them as being virtuous and upwardly mobile. Next slide, please. In addition to focusing on enhancing their physical appearance, aesthetic capital rested on cultivating and honing 3 forms of capital, which I will describe more in depth. One is cultural capital, through highlighting skills like being a strong communicator with excellent English speaking skills. Oftentimes aspects like grammar and accent were especially emphasized. They also had to hone their social capital by emphasizing social connections with the upper echelons of Nigerian society. And they also had to cultivate economic mobility by stressing their access to new forms of financial capital through material resources like cars and cash that signaled their own upward economic mobility. Next slide, please. One of the ways contestants stressed the important symbolic work that they were doing as beauty diplomats was by distancing themselves from others in similar industries like modeling. They often describe models as faceless, fine books without content, and as simply hangers. They would focus on their own work as special and as requiring additional labor that modeling did not. They highlighted the contrast with models by emphasizing that while models were only prized for their physical attributes, beauty queens had much higher expectations about how they conducted themselves in public and had to use their voices effectively. They were often quick to point out that the charity work that they did allowed them to champion for the interests of the most vulnerable segments of Nigerian society, which was in stark contrast to what models do, who they portrayed as vapid and incompetent. Next slide, please. So for example, Nyeka, a beauty contestant, said, quote, basically models are just hangers. They walk and they have that blank expression on their face, and they just basically show the clothes. They're not doing anything. They just walk, come out, and that's just what they do. But for pageantry is you, your beauty, intelligence, creativity, boldness, communication. It is basically you, showcasing you and what you've got. Next slide, please. Similarly, Ogechi, another beauty contestant, said, quote, they're not talking about Nigeria when they interview some models. The models can't even speak good English. In modeling, you don't have to talk, but in pageantry, you can't escape that. You have to talk. The camera will always get you. So beauty contestants often placed a high value and high importance on their ability to speak well. They worked on developing a particular lilt to their voice in terms of accents that were meant to connote being educated or well-traveled. And they also emphasized their ability to interact with the public as a specific form of cultural capital that beauty diplomats had to engage in. Next slide, please. Beauty diplomats had a certain type of currency. Beauty contestants worked to leverage their positions to gain access to social and economic mobility. Contestants were often motivated to participate for financial rewards and social contacts. Contestants often came from working class or middle class backgrounds, and participating in pageants eased their entry into elite social circles. They were able to hobnob with celebrities, politicians, and business executives. People often describe contestants' participation as being a striking transformation where they went from quote unquote regular girls to cultured beauties and cosmopolitan jet setters. The increase in social capital was a tangible benefit that contestants shared as part of their participation. So for example, contestants shared the following statements. It makes you a better person. You have an opportunity to have the best and also improve. You meet a lot of better people. You have an opportunity to achieve something. If there's anything you want to do, but you don't have an opportunity, it's just going to pave a way for you to do it, to do anything that you want to do. So again, emphasizing those social connections. And then the contestant said, quote, I made fantastic contacts. That was one thing. People I didn't know before, the movers and the shakers, who can help you in life. I met them and they were like, oh, you're the new girl. So these social contacts were also part of the capital that they used to be able to do some of the lobbying and civic work they aspired to. But these social connections were also important to legitimating their positions as beauty diplomats. So without being well known in these particular social circles, the work that they were doing would not be taken seriously. Next slide, please. Marrying well was also viewed as an important element of social mobility. Pageant contestants had direct access to some of the nation's most powerful political elites, such as politicians, elite businessmen, and acclaimed celebrities. There was one particular moment that I think really illustrated for me when I was doing my field work. I was standing to the side and one of the staff members for the pageant, Mr. OK, was making a comment, and he was telling me, I'm always scared of these girls. And I was asking why, because it was a surprising statement. And he said, they're powerful. That's why I'm always nice to them. They're all going to dump their boyfriends after all this is over. You'd be surprised. One of them might be the future wife to a minister, meaning the head of national government ministries. And then he said, they might be the one that make a phone call to make or destroy a deal. So Mr. Ok's words revealed the implicit awareness that contestants' access to social mobility hinged on part in terms of their connections to very powerful men in the country. Next slide, please. Contestants' economic mobility was also constantly highlighted. To enter the pageant, it cost, when I was doing my fieldwork at the time, around $35, and contestants had additional costs in terms of clothing, accessories, styling treatments that could be as much as $1,000, which is an astronomical sum for most middle-class families. But beauty contestants often justify their participation and having to prepare for this by likening the competition to a lottery ticket, since the top prize earned as over $20,000 and also came with the possibility of additional endorsement deals, free trips, and lavish gifts. Mobility was often measured in very tangible ways. So the most tangible way that I encountered was the emphasis on cars. So in almost every pageant in Nigeria, the winner will win a car. And oftentimes, this is like the first car that contestants get access to. And so the make and the model of the car was of high importance. And it was a way of, again, having these tangible signals of economic mobility. Other forms of capital were having the opportunity, or of economic mobility, were having the opportunity to travel abroad or relocating abroad. That was another important way of signaling mobility. Next slide, please. For many contestants, their ability to have a voice and to be taken seriously in arenas outside of the pageant world, for example, by lobbying politicians and hobnobbing with business executives, was a source of empowerment. So empowerment was a constant refrain that I heard throughout my fieldwork. And affiliates stressed that the prospects of social mobility and economic mobility through pageantry was especially important in an economic context like Nigeria. And this context in which young women in particular faced barriers due to their age and gender. So oftentimes those that were working in the industry would say, this is a tangible way in which women can get ahead, can make money, meet those that are important in this country. And as such, it should be recognized as a key source of empowerment for women. Kemi, one of the contestants, also kind of agreed with this sentiment of empowerment. When I asked her to explain to me why it was important for her to participate, she said, quote, "First of all, it was a competition with probably thousands of girls around the nation. You feel, wow, this is another massive step. It puts in your mind, I can do this. In the course of it, you get a lot of girls telling you how much they want to be like you, how much you inspire them. You can actually have a voice." Again, this emphasis on having a voice. So it's important, it's empowering as a woman in Nigeria. Empowerment, however, was a fraught subject. So on the one hand, contestants and others were able to articulate to me forms of self-empowerment. So for example, placing emphasis on forms of developing increased confidence, poise, and etiquette. But they also did not necessarily translate into transformative structural changes for Nigerian women as a whole. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Though contestants often narrated feelings of some measure of empowerment, however limited, they often discussed some of the constraints they felt in fully realizing their potential and aspirations. So for example, Kemi, the same contestant who shared her excitement about participating and viewed pageantry as a form of empowerment, also shared some of the constraints that she felt. So she talked about how she had won this endorsement deal as a part of participating in the pageant. And she discussed how immediately after she had participated in the pageant, she was fielding calls from family members who had seen her on TV. She had heard rumors from family members and friends that she had bought a new home in Ikoyi, which is a ritzy neighborhood in Lagos. And she just basically had heard all these rumors that she now had access to a lot of wealth and capital. But she shared how she had to go into hiding for months, and that's because she had not yet been paid for the endorsement deal. And she could not be seen around the city in taxis or public transportation or any kind of mode of transportation that was not considered up to par to her new status. If she did, she risked being splashed and ridiculed on tabloids and would have increased public scrutiny. So while Kemi viewed beauty competitions as inspirational, as honing her own confidence and allowing Nigeria to shine, she also narrated to me a series of dashed hopes and false promises that littered her experiences with pageants. Her experience highlights the tensions of optimism, yet and how they're tempered by the structural constraints and realities that also mirror more broadly the beauty diplomacy narrative. Okay, so next slide. In conclusion, beauty diplomacy is leveraged to symbolically repair and promote positive attributes in Nigeria. This symbolic work that is undertaken by beauty queens is also met with material realities that constrain and enable the work that beauty queens do in the interest of the nation and also for themselves. Beauty contestants harness the aesthetic labor of their own bodies and participate in pageants as a means of securing their own futures. These ambitions, however, are constrained by material conditions within Nigeria. Through the lens of beauty diplomacy, I highlight how beauty competitions serve as public projections of collective hopes and also anxieties of a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Balogun. We are going to open up the discussion section now, where we will take questions and answer. And Dr. England, please, maybe you will take some of the questions from the Q&A on the chat. There's one there already from Saliana. Did you read that already? I did. Maybe I can quickly talk about that. So any other ones that come, Dr. England can take that and we can just switch back and forth. Okay, so there's one question already there in the chat for you, Professor Balogun. So Saliana was asking a question about the connection between her research and yours. She did a research on beauty pageants in Somalia. And she's really interested in knowing about how you are constructing this idea of women and nationhood, because there is a proverb that is similar to the same one you shared. There is no home without women. And then she's really curious about how you discuss this idea of woman as a nation, and if you have any citations to share about that concept.
Yeah, okay, great. Yes, thank you for that question. And I'm happy to be in conversation via email if you want to talk more about some of the synergies between our work. Yeah, I definitely think that this link between how conventionally women are positioned as the taking up the helm of the home in terms of the domestic sphere, as translating into how that works in terms of ideas about taking up the helm of being the face of a nation, right? And so there's certain types of work that beauty contestants can do that in my research I found was seen as particular to constructions of femininity and constructions of womanhood, right? And so sharing how, and part of that work in terms of like the nation building work was seen as because they're able to kind of get a certain kind of entry point through their physical beauty and through also embodied forms of disposition that constructions of masculinity did not allow for, right? And so there's particular ideas about femininity that are at play in terms of thinking about, again, the connection between women and nation. Some common, sorry, I'm also looking at the chat more. Some citations would be Nira Yuval Davis has done theoretical work of kind of showing the connection between gender and nation, specifically in terms of how women come to become these symbolic cultural bearers of the nation. Also ideas about biologically reproducing the nation, so symbolic ideas about pronatalism as being a way of showing this connection between women and nation. There's also the work by Tamar Mayer, who has done work on ideas about body nationalism. I also rely on the work from Anne McClintock, who's done work around kind of the ties between imperialism, gender, and nation building in South Africa in terms of like social movements and how ideas about womanhood are connected to thinking about nationalist movements. We also have Jackie, who's here at the University of Wisconsin, who's also, I think, has great work on thinking about gender and nation. So I'm happy, again, to like chat more via email if you want to think more about additional citations.
Jackie's ears must be burning because it looks like Jackie's question is actually up next in our Q&A.
Okay. Does Nigeria have pageants for older women? Yes. So there are ones for older women. There is a Mrs. Nigeria that I ran across when I was doing research. One of the pageants I was studying also wanted to do like a mother-daughter pageant to include like moms and their daughters, but they're not as common. And even though they will similarly use that language of idealized gender in the nation, they're just not they're often not positioned as doing the public facing work, as I found in kind of these particular pageants, which I thought was important to note because it also conveys particular parameters of who's able to do this public work, right? So these were women in the pageants I studied who were young women, 18 to 26. At the time when I was doing the research, they could not be married, they could not have a child. They were also ways in which their sexuality was policed in particular ways in the pageant. So even though you will find these pageants that are either for older women, they also have some pageants for young girls. They'll also have pageants for like different body sizes and emphasize those different body sizes. So there are different types of pageants in Nigeria, but I found that it was the one that kind of fit into these particular conventions that were the most public facing and the ones in which they were more likely to kind of double down on the kind of the beauty diplomacy work that they were doing. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah, there's a question from Rachel. I'm not sure if you can see that. So she's really interested in knowing about beauty diplomacy. This person named Shati Garko, the 44th Miss Nigeria in 2021, and how our women speaks to the dichotomy of the North and the South, especially in light of Nigerians' embodied nationalism.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. So when I was doing this research, oftentimes they would tell me that it's really difficult to get women that are Muslims to participate in the pageant, right? And so it was often a common assumption that almost everyone there was Christian, even though that was not actually the case. So for example, in one of the pageants I studied, the woman that won was actually Muslim. But it was surprising because she did not fit the particular image that they had of who a Muslim was. So she wasn't hijabi. But I think that that particular example kind of illustrated some of the assumptions in the pageant world. And I think this particular win of the first hijabi woman winning the pageant was significant to wanting to bridge some of those divides in terms of religion. That's probably most poignantly represented through this North-South divide. So oftentimes when I was doing the field work, folks would tell me that, oh, pageants are not in the North. We can't have pageants in the North. The pageant that I had observed where the winner was Muslim did not have a swimsuit competition. And oftentimes that was pointed as like the key stumbling block. Sorry, for why Muslims or even those from the North more broadly, which even outside of religion is constructed in Nigeria as being more culturally conservative. So they would say that, oh, that's a major stumbling block. So the Miss Nigeria pageant does not have a swimsuit competition in its history. So it started in 1957, it has, but when it kind of reemerged, actually right when I was wrapping up my field work in 2010, they decided not to have swimsuits. So that's kind of one particular angle of how is it that, often the swimsuit competition was repeated as like, oh, this is why we won't get people from the North. But I think that, having that winner, the first hijabi woman, is significant in terms of wanting to bridge and ameliorate the social divisions in the country. So thank you for that question.
Looks like Noma has a question in the Q&A referring to methodology.
Okay, so the question is, can I speak more to the methods in terms of recruitment? How did you go about promoting the unpaid internship? Was there a call by these beauty organizations, or did you have to solicit? Yeah, so I had to solicit it personally. It wasn't a call. I think part of fieldwork is, part of it is you do the recruitment and you have your plans, and then another part of it is just luck and accident. So I had put together a formal proposal of, I want to study this, because it was at the time, it was my dissertation research. I had said I was a PhD student, I wanted to study this, and I had sent it as a formal request through their like generic email. I didn't get a response. And so what I had done is, so one of the pageants I studied is part of a television network. And so I had contacted one of the journalists who had like the morning show at the time on a whim. And she actually had been in the US she had gone to the US for college and then went back to Nigeria to work. So I contacted her on a whim on Facebook, and I was like, I want to do this project. And she basically was like, this is really interesting. She was someone who just liked the idea of academia, and she kind of facilitated me getting that internship. So introducing me to the owners of that organization. And I proposed, basically, you get free labor from me and I can do this research. So that's how it worked. So, part of that is, having strategies in mind of how you can facilitate access. And then part of it is just accident and luck and who you can talk to and convince. So there was definitely ways in which I think my own background helped, like, me having a Nigerian background definitely, I think, helped in some ways. And then being a student in the US at the time also helped, I think, because there were ways in which, like, oh, someone is interested in studying us. This is showing us that we're important. On the other hand, because I was a student at the time, I was also not like perceived as particularly threatening. So I can say that about my methods.
I think we still have room for at least one more question. If there's any other question from the... So maybe I can just jump in at this point. Okay, is there a person really asking a question? Okay, sure. So I have this question about the positionality of these beauty pageants, especially in relation to people in leadership. So it seems that the kind of power that beauty pageants have in Nigeria is sort of like some soft power. And that kind of power is not even validated if it is not conceived in relation to the kind of power that they can get from men or people in leadership. So I don't know if you got to this in your book or in some other works that you have done. How about, did you address the possibility of even like thinking about women taking the position of leadership? Would that impact on the kind of power beauty pageants have, shifting it from soft to some sort of, more validated power that is central to the whole national idea or ideology of the Nigerian nation itself? So I'm just curious about that dynamic.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I would say that there are ways in which it is translated into tangible forms of power. So, but they can only be leveraged by having that intermediary soft power, right? So they're able to kind of use and work within the material conditions and constraints of what's happening in Nigeria to have some modicum of power in some respects. So there has been what common person who's touted is one of the contestants, former contestants in the past, went into the House of Representatives. So there are ways in which they talk about how this can launch political careers. It's not common, but it has happened. Oftentimes, contestants will develop nonprofit organizations, which they develop into kind of their own thing where they use that to, you know, build awareness, but also, you know, it's a way of securing their own, you know, social livelihoods by having these nonprofits. A lot of the contestants that I ended up following and kind of keeping tabs on, I would say that though they're not I mean, it's an unusual case that they become these political leaders, like the House of Representatives that I'd mentioned, but they do often are married to some of these politicians, right? And so we can definitely debate to what extent that is giving them tangible power. But if you think about like the roles of first ladies and again some of those constraints with that, you can see that, you know, there's work that they're doing at the public level, but you know, there's definitely questions to be asked about, okay, what does that mean tangibly? But most of the women that I followed up with, they're either working in entertainment, so they are acting, or they're working in kind of the fashion and beauty industry, so they might have their own brands, or they're starting their own brands, or they work in the professions, so they're, you know, bankers and doctors and lawyers. So those are the common like after paths that I saw, but there were definitely ways in which I'm not entirely dismissive of the soft power they do have, but recognizing that it's working within a set of constraints that exist within Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Adiola, do you want me to
Yes.
step in here? Okay. I think we've reached the hour. You know, we tend to, and especially at Africa at Noon, try to give everybody a chance who needs to, you know, run off and teach and that kind of thing a chance to do that. It looks like our timing's perfect as far as the Q&A goes. So obviously, on behalf of the department, behalf of the series, and so far as I'm qualified to speak on behalf of both Africa at Noon and the Embodied Africa shorter series of speakers. Thank you very, very much to Professor Balogun for the talk, and thanks to you for tuning in on Zoom and joining us. And obviously, you know, the series both on both ends, the series of Africa at Noon and Embodied Africa is going to continue basically to the tail end of our spring semester. So thanks, and you know, the air clap through Zoom to our speaker here, and also thanks, of course, to Adiola as well for working with me on the hosting, and as always to the African Studies program.
Thank you, everyone.